got an interesting story that I'm not sure how to think about it. Well, maybe you can tell us how you think about it. China has become the world's largest trader. What does that mean? That means that in 2013, China traded $4.16 trillion worth of economic activity, essentially. This is the trading that took place, $4 trillion worth of it. In the United States, only $3.57 trillion took place between January and November. So unless they had a $600 billion December, which is highly unlikely, China is and has become the world's largest trader. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that China is the strongest country in the world? That it means that it's the most economically powerful country in the world? Not necessarily. The United States was the largest economy and largest trading country in the world for decades, and maybe even almost 100 years before they actually had any real geopolitical dominance, where they came out and started to take over the world. So these things where you see China overtakes the U.S. in trading, that doesn't necessarily mean that China is overtaking the U.S. in terms of real power and hegemony and economic might. But what it does show is that China is becoming the dominant economic center in the world, where most of the activity is going to take place, at least in the decades to come, in the foreseeable future. The East in general is becoming the economic hub of the world now. The economic hub where you see a lot of dynamic growth. And until Africa starts to take off as a whole, there are certain sectors of Africa that have insanely dynamic growth. Now it should, but until Africa takes off as a whole, it's not going to compete with Asia that way. But what does this mean? I mean, you see, what I like to always tell people is look at the buildings in cities. Where you see tall buildings, that's where power resides. If you look at the United States in the early 1900s, you see people would come here and look at the Empire State Building, the skyscrapers, the Chrysler Tower. You know, people would think of the United States and think of the skyscrapers, think of the tall buildings, and there's a reason for that. That's because they have the most money. They have the ability to build these things. Now, there's still giant, huge buildings being built all over the United States, but you think about where are the most big buildings being built right now? China. You look at these huge, massive cities, they have dozens of them in the millions and millions of people, and then when you get to their super cities like Beijing, you look at Hong Kong, you look at the size of these cities and the infrastructure that has been built up in the last decades, the size of those buildings. These are the New Yorks of the 21st century. These are the economic hubs, and maybe not right now, they're not the most dominant force in the world, but give it 50, 75 years, China probably will be the dominant force in the world. That's just how these things go. These things go in cycles. China has always been the most dominant empire culture in the world for human history. All of recorded human history, China has been the dominant culture, the strongest culture. Now, you could disagree with that, but you just have to study history a little more and you'll see that. This last 500 years, last 400 years, China has not been the most dominant country in the world, the most dominant culture in the world. This is an aberration of history, frankly. The same thing goes for Persia, the Persian Empire. When you look at these countries, people in the West are often surprised, like, how are they ever going to be wealthy? How are they going to be like us? Well, for all of history, they were superior in many ways. Their culture, their civilization, their way of life, their standards of living, and everything had a science, in every way, in every measurable way, they had a superior culture to those in Europe, the people who, and later in the United States, which would traditionally, degrade them and deride these civilizations. It's a historical aberration that they have been downtrodden by the West in the last couple hundred years. So they're going to rise again, and it's only a matter of time. But is that going to mean that the world's going to end for people in the United States and Europe, and we're all going to be put into camps by the Chinese? No, absolutely not. Didn't happen with the U.S., didn't happen with any other country that rises up. There are going to be wars. There are going to be power plays. There's going to be geopolitical hegemony issues. But those things are always going to take place. And any one country is not any worse than the other when it comes to these things. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.